to Spooky Southcoast. Tim Weisberg here, along with Stephanie Burke, Science Advisor Matt Moniz, and the Silent Assassin Matt Costa. And whatever that is, it's still persisting.
Yeah. I wonder what that is.
I don't know either. No.
It's gone now.
Yeah, it went away. I'm sure we're going to get all kinds of tweets. Oh, see, there it goes. I'm cracking again. We're going to get all kinds of tweets and everything from people saying, oh, I don't know what's happening. I think it's because we are trying to record the show like 3,000 times over tonight.
We're trying to cover all our bases. Basically.
Right, because we've been having some issues here with the computer with recording. We want to make sure that we get the podcast, so we are insulating ourselves 1,000 times over. We're basically like we've got everything except reel-to-reel going to record the show. And
that's in the next room, you know.
Yeah, I was going to say, even that we could probably get going during the next break if need be. But welcome to the program where we talk about the paranormal each and every Saturday night. We'll try and keep fixing these pops and cracks. You know what we'll do is we'll just tell everybody we're on vinyl.
Yeah.
Then they won't know the difference. Be like, that's the authentic sound. That's how it's supposed to sound. I don't know what's happening here, but we'll keep trying to figure that out. And tonight we have a special guest joining us for a little bit here at the beginning of the program. And I will let Matt Moniz introduce him because Matt knows about the case. And he has worked on aspects of the case, and he's met John and knows him personally. So I will allow Moniz to introduce the guest and kind of lead this discussion for us.
Well, first off, I haven't actually met John. I know him through doing the case. But in the late December of 1980, on roughly 3 consecutive nights, a craft or series of crafts came into the Bentwaters area, which was in the eastern part of England. And during that time, that was when we were heavy into the Cold War. There was lots of trouble brewing in Poland, and we were nose to nose with the Russians, and these bases were on high alert. And when these unknown objects came in, base people were sent out to investigate, and John was one of the first people to go out on one of these forays into the forest to encounter these unknown objects.
And so now we welcome to the program John Burroughs. Good evening, John. How are you?
Good. How are you?
We're doing pretty well. Thank you for joining us. I know that you only have a brief window of opportunity here, but we hope to have you back in the future for a full show. But we'll try and get as much of the information out there tonight as we can. And, of course, Matt Moniz will be leading the discussion. But you're also on with Stephanie and another Matt and myself.
Okay.
All right, John. First, I want to thank you very much for coming on. Now,
it's a pleasure.
Now, I've been involved with this case in a secondary nature, so I'm pretty familiar with most of what had happened. But I was always fascinated with what happened with you and Jim Penniston. If you would you be so kind to explain what brought you out into the Rendlesham Forest that night?
Yeah, sure. It's ironic that tonight is the 34th anniversary. It would be the third night of the 3-day incident. We were on duty. We came on duty Christmas evening, 11th, at about 3 o'clock in the morning on the 26th, which is Boxing Day over the United Kingdom. While on patrol, we were, myself and Sergeant Steffens were checking the back perimeter fence, which is called East Gate. And when we were heading down there to check it, we saw Sergeant Steffens at first saw something strange. Later on said that he thought it was coming into the forest and landed into the forest, but it was into the forest area itself. We went ahead and went down to get some kind of idea what it was. We didn't like what we were dealing with. We didn't like the feelings of it, and we just left it. We were just outside the perimeter of the base itself. Came back up to the gate, called it in. They sent a security unit down after we called it in to check it out also. At that point, Sergeant Penniston saw the strange lights also. Conferred with Central Security Control and our ship commander, Lieutenant Baran. And also at the same time, they were checking different radar sites, and there was confirmation that came in that something had been seen on radar over the area and disappeared. A decision was made possibly that an aircraft that went down into the forest area. So myself, Sergeant Penniston, and his rider departed the base to go into the forest to check out what we might be dealing with.
Now, did you contact the sister base next door at Woodbridge as well as any local authorities? Because you're
actually, we were on Woodbridge. Bentwaters, it was for years called the Bentwaters incident.
Yeah.
In actuality, we were on Woodbridge. So we were the security and law enforcement on Woodbridge that night, and CSC was out of Bentwaters, and that's who we contacted. So we departed from Woodbridge Base into the forest.
Did you also contact local authorities because you were leaving?
Yeah, while this was going on, the British police were also notified that something was going on.
Okay. Now, can you describe what you saw in terms of, the lights and stuff like that? What made them uneasy to you, as you put it?
Well, for us, at first, when Sergeant Steffens and I went out there, when we came down to the end of the road, I jumped out of the vehicle. It just didn't feel right. There was a static electricity in the air, and the lights were moving around. And it was just the idea that I'd been there almost 2 years and never seen anything like it, and there was just something out there that couldn't be explained. So that's when we called it in. I mean, as far as it went from we saw something and we could identify it or, whatever, to the point of we're seeing something that we just can't really get a handle on what we were dealing with.
Okay. Now, when you went out with Jim Penniston, he obviously got a lot closer, as you explain in your book. And were you able to see Jim the entire time during his experience?
No, actually, that's one of the things that happened. We went out into the forest, and we eventually got close to whatever it was. Jim has described it as a triangular object. He actually touched it. There were glyphs on it and had a binary download. All I remember was getting close to something, hitting the ground. As we got into the little opening area in the forest, all of a sudden there was this bright white light. The light got really bright and white, and we hit the ground. And the next thing I remember is it dimming and going back up into the forest. Up into the sky, from the forest. All right.
Now, was it always just one color, or did it change colors at any point?
Well, for me, and eventually my statement got released, it was like an orangish oval, the center of it was, and then it was like an orangish hue around it, plus there was a white type of bright light with some blue lights within the within the white light and the orangish hue below the oval orangish ball.
Okay, now did you have any other sensations like hearing or anything else? Did any of your other body senses get tripped by this thing?
Well, the only thing I can remember was the static electricity in the air and the feeling that you get when you feel like you're in an unsecure area, kind of like you're in a situation that gives you the feeling that you're not really secure. I've only had it happen 2 or 3 times in my lifetime, but there was kind of like, there was the unknown to the point of just, you didn't feel good right about what you were dealing with. It just didn't feel right.
Your fight or flight senses were starting to
that's a good way to put it, yeah.
Okay, and usually those are triggered because your senses are trying to tell you you're in danger. There's something there that's...
Right. I say danger. You can say danger. That would have been a feeling that you felt. But, there was nothing that I can remember as I was out there that made me felt like, or us, I should say, felt like we were going to, be attacked by it or whatever, or, threatened by it, other than when we did get close to it, at one point, Jim in front of me felt like it was more threatening. So...
threatening as in not so much that you're being imminently put in danger because of whatever, but more the feeling of because you're encountering something that you're not familiar with, and the uncertainty is what's making you apprehensive.
Probably the second one was more along the lines of that. When you're out there dealing with something you've never seen or dealt with before, what it was doing and stuff. Yeah.
Well, one of the questions that I had for you, John, is you reported originally that there was some strange noises that you heard, and I wonder if you could kind of describe for us what that sounded like.
Well, what was said was when we were in the forest, you could actually at some points hear the animals themselves, even like a screeching deer or something like that, or an animal screeching, And the farmyard animals also seemed to be excited. There was a farm in front of us, so the animals were acting up as we were out there in the forest that night.
So all the noises that you heard, you can kind of attribute to those animals?
Yeah.
Even though they're in a highly agitated state?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. The animals, seem to be, very, I guess agitated is a good way to put it, or excited, or something was disturbing them, in the middle of the night. So.
Now, how far away from the base was this object from where you guys
The perimeter fence line, I got asked that the other day again. I don't think we were more than a quarter to half a mile into the forest. I mean, somebody might correct me that actually knows the forest better than I do, but, it was maybe the most a half a mile from the base perimeter to the area in the forest where we were before we went out eventually into the farmer's field and farther out.
And so you were not able to really see the base all that well from your position?
Oh, no. From the gate, the way the forest was, as far as once you got down to the end of the road where you had to go left or right, left towards Bentwaters, there was a forest there, and you couldn't see once you were in the forest back towards the base itself, no.
So it would stand to reason you also wouldn't be able to see towards the shoreline either, correct?
Right.
So would you be able to see the base lights from where you were?
Not once you got into the forest, no. You couldn't, you couldn't really see. Even from the gate, once you looked out into the forest, you couldn't see, it was a pretty decent-sized forest, that was out there in front of us.
Okay, so the likelihood of confusing, say, like a lighthouse would...
I knew that was going to come. No, what we encountered, especially, you go back and you look at it, where we were in the forest, you couldn't see the lighthouse. And what we saw do go up and do all that stuff, it wasn't the lighthouse. I mean, so, yeah.
I have...
That's funny, though. But.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is something that's come up from a lot of skeptics on the case, is they always point out the fact that the Orford Ness Lighthouse is nearby. But obviously, being there, you would know the difference. You would know the lighthouse that you would see.
Yeah, I mean, what we saw do, it couldn't be the lighthouse. And where we were, you could see the lighthouse. You couldn't see it from the east gate either. And, I mean, the thing is that that's all they got, if you think about it. That's all we can say that we possibly dealt with. And, I mean, it happened over 3 nights. I guarantee you, after the first night, they were all the people that were out there trying to figure it out. You know what I'm saying? It happened over 3 nights. By that time, you'd think by the 3rd night for sure, if it would have been the lighthouse at all, possibly at all, they would have figured it out by then. And, in the Colonel Hall's group that was out there, Colonel Hall was actually a combat controller in Vietnam. I think he would be able to distinguish a lighthouse from something that was unidentified flying around.
And we've played the Halt tape here on the show before in the past, and when you listen to that, you can tell this is somebody who's describing something that is not a lighthouse. And at no point in the tape does it dawn on him like, oh, gee, maybe this is the lighthouse that we see all the time.
Right, and I mean, the thing is that you could say after the fact, well, they were covering it. No, when the incident took place, it was kept quiet until 1983. Before it finally broke out anyway. But the bottom line was that when he would have went out there first thing and took a look around, if he would have felt it was something like that, it would have been over. It would have been identified. That was the end of it. He even said early on that he was out there to debunk it. And as it unfolded in front of him, including the tape, you could tell, he didn't debunk it. He just walked into the hornet's nest. And even the one part of the tape that's always stunning that people listen to it is when it comes at him and it beams the light down in their general direction. He says, "This is unreal. You just got to listen to his voice." So, this thing it's unexplainable what it is as far as exactly what it is to me, still to this day. So.
True, and there's one other item about the lighthouse that most people are unaware of. The back portion that faces the land has a big steel plate welded over it so the light doesn't shine inland.
Well, right. I mean, once you got out to the farmer's field and went towards the coast, you could see a beacon. I mean, I put that in my statement, but that isn't what we dealt with. And when I was out there on the 3rd night, also that isn't what I saw, was dealing with. And neither night was, when I was out there, was it what we weren't dealing with the lighthouse. So that's just the way I put it. So.
Now, a lot has been made over recent years about Jim Penniston's account of actually going out and touching the craft and taking photos of the craft, and there was some contradiction in your original statements, at least when you were talking to some television programs, where you were saying that it kind of just took off rather quickly. It sounds like from what you were saying earlier that you are supporting Jim Penniston's account that he did actually approach the craft.
I'm not. I mean, so if you say supporting, I didn't see it happen. I've never said that I saw it happen.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I've always just said over the years exactly what I remember happening. Got close to it. The light got really bright, then it dimmed, and it went up into the sky and moved away. I did not see what he said happened to him happen. I've never said that, and to this day I've never said that. Doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Right. You have no reason not to believe his account.
Yeah, I've known that based on a lot of other factors, I have no reason not to believe it didn't happen. I mean, to include some, research I've done over the years, and I've come across some classified documents that have been declassified, explaining why each one of us, when we were affected by it, could affect us differently in what we saw and what went on. So
sure, and of course, the skeptics, they love to have anything that they can use in their argument, and that's one of the things that they've tried to do is play those accounts against each other, even though you've been very forthcoming in saying, what you just said.
Look at it this way. Lawyers do this all the time in court with people that are witnesses to car accidents. Mm-hmm. Everybody sees the accident differently. The person in the car, the person standing on the sidewalk, the other person that hit the other car.
And they'll play those accounts against each other to further their argument.
Right. Well, I mean, since we've discussed this, there's something I want to bring up, Professor. I know we don't have a lot of time tonight. But there was a British study that was done, and what they've done is they've labeled it, they call them UAPs. Actually, they used to call it UFOs. Then, down the line, they reclassified it as UAPs to get away from the UFO thing. But it's called Project Condign, and it was done by the British. It was the actual UFO phenomenon was investigated, and it was a secret classified document that was declassified and released through Freedom of Information, and a lot of it's still classified, it's still redacted. But within it, within this document, I'm going to read you a little passage from it, and it mentions Rendlesham in it, and it's one of the only cases that's mentioned within this whole study that was done. And it's buried down on page F4 of the volume 2 in the section about the potential mental effects on humans in this passage. The linking of brain activity to UAP events where the witness is presumably within nearer field influence is currently only partially understood, since assumptions must be made as to the type of fields being encountered. Within the United Kingdom, these close encounters occur only a few times each year. The well-reported Rendlesham Forest Bentwaters event is an example where it's postulated that several observers were probably exposed to UAP radiation for longer than normal UAP sighting periods. There may be other cases that remain unreported. So there's a report out there. It's been declassified. It hasn't been covered very much, but it goes into the phenomenon itself, the actual investigation work. They were looking at it through documents and stuff that they had, to in fact admitting that one of the things that they're doing with what we're dealing with is the fact that they're trying to weaponize whatever it is.
And they're trying to pass it off by saying that you might have hallucinated some of what you saw because of what you saw. They're kind of catch-22ing themselves a little bit there to cover.
Well, yeah, this is a catch-22 report. You've got to really dig into it to understand it. But one of the things that you take out of it is when you get into the field, the near-infield influence of it, it affects different people differently when they're close to it. Mm-hmm. What they've seen, what they remember, and everything else. And it even says right in there that, we were exposed to a certain kind of radiation, which is not the type of radiation most people think it is. And actually that radiation is highly classified and is being used in weaponry today within the United States military.
And I know that a lot of the witnesses to the Rendlesham case, they haven't, nobody's really come out and said this was alien craft. I mean, this could have been something that is just some sort of weapon that you had never encountered before, something that was being kept even secret from those working on the base. I mean, in your gut, what does your gut tell you that you encountered that on that structure?
Well, I always stuck with something that at this point I still haven't been able to 100% prove it yet, but because now of the fact that my medical records are classified, they've altered my service record to say I wasn't even when the incident happened. To me, they were definitely working on something in the area. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of other facilities just outside the perimeter of Woodbridge Bentwaters Base. There's Marconi Company was working with Marlsham Heath, RAF Bowsy. They were working, there were some other facilities there, including I believe an MI6 facility that was there at the time. And if you know the area, that's where they started working on radar. You know, that's where they do a lot of secret weapons testing and stuff like that. So there's a good chance there was something going on that we were either aware of in the area, and if you go into Condyne, they admit that area is an area where they knew something was going on that they hadn't totally identified. As a matter of fact, there was a group of British scientists down there studying that area when our incident happened. So there was something we were probably doing, and who knows if we did something that triggered something coming in, you know, or whatever. But it clearly, to me, involves something probably to do with the military, not at the base itself, but the weapons testing around there, which is special access programs, and who knows what else it was. It very well, this declassified documents, there's a phenomenon. It's undisputable that there is a phenomenon that exists, and it's able to do unbelievable things. So based on the documents and everything that I've done, we were dealing with something that we were aware of in the area, and they were either testing it or whatever. There's a lot of possibilities of what was going on.
Oh, well, just in the final few moments that we have with John, does anybody have any final questions for him?
I got a couple. Now, as you may or may not know, I did the testing for Larry on his soil samples from his night's events.
Right.
Did anybody do any real testing on the landing soil at the event that you guys had, that you're aware of?
From what, if you listen to the all tape, they were out there doing some stuff. They took some soil samples. They had a Geiger counter out there. They were working on some of it. And Colonel Hall has said that they actually took the samples and sent them off for testing. Now, there's never been any confirmation on what the testing came back with, but that there was some samples taken from the area. There was a team out there after the incident was working out there, and rumor has it they actually took some samples too. So it's clear, yes, the area was tested, and and there was probably some testing done on it, but we've never been privy to what the results were.
Interesting. I'd like, to see that your health is looked after, though, because that is one of the reports I'm getting from other people that were involved, that they are suffering certain medical effects.
Well, yeah, no, it's a radiation. It's something that it's taken years of work for me to do, but it was a radiation, and it's not the type of radiation people think it is. And it ties into this phenomenon itself, and it's cutting-edge technology that the government's working on right now, and in use, and that itself would make this whole incident classified to this day. I mean, why my medical records are classified, why we can't get them, why some of my just recent surgery and stuff, some of that stuff is certain doctors can't even look at that. So the radiation itself and the way it's being used is important, and and it more than likely falls under national defense. But I mean, at the same time, a lot of us were exposed to something that we're not getting the proper care either.
And that is a shame. I'm sorry. And thank you for your service, sir.
Well, thank you.
All right. Well, that about does it for our time with you, John. But hopefully you can come back sometime in the future. Yeah,
I'd love to come back on, and give me a couple hours to explain it all. But there's a lot to this I've uncovered over the last, 3 or 4 years that makes a lot of sense and is continuing, including the FOIA I've done with the British government. And I don't know if you're aware of it real fast, but I'll run this down. Through my FOIA, throughout Condyne and everything else, I got them to admit they're still holding 18 files that they denied. They said they released everything, but I got them to admit they're holding 18 more files, including 6 policy files that are yet to be released, and they still won't admit when they're going to release them, and some of it still has Rendlesham stuff in it. So.
Wow. Well, that could be a bombshell to be dropped sometime in the future, and we certainly look forward to talking to you then, where we can find out a little bit more about your research. And I really want to get into some of these effects that in the research that you've done with the Condyne information that you've come across. That's something that we should really focus on, because I think that's lost on a lot of people who have, who research these. They don't realize the personal impact that it has on the witnesses that view these craft.
Right. I'd love to come back on. I appreciate it, guys.
All right. Thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, have a good night. Thanks.
You as well. That is John Burroughs, Rendlesham UFO witness, and certainly one of the people that, when you look at high character individuals, Moniz, we talk about this all the time, that when you have these reports, when you have UFO sightings, what really matters is when you can get somebody who has character that is almost unquestioned, or at least has observational skills and observational abilities that the common person may not have.
Well, he was definitely well trained. Air Force, security, police, and he's many years. He knows what he's doing. He's trained to do this. So you can't have pretty much any better observer for an event like that, because what's he supposed to do? He's supposed to secure the area around the base. And
there are people who are, their sole job is just to watch.
Yeah.
You're watching the skies. You're not watching for UFOs. You're watching for enemy craft. You're watching for any type of spy craft that might be coming over. And so you know when something's out of the ordinary. You know when something doesn't fit into the patterns of what you're usually looking for.
Well, you also got to remember, like I said, at that time, it was a high stress level of the relationship between the former Soviet Union and the United States. This is right when the riots and solidarity were going on in Poland, and Russia had literally hundreds of thousands of troops on the border, and we had our troops standing ready, loaded for bear, quite literally. And this incursion happens right outside a secure base.
And it happens with a base where there reportedly were nuclear weapons, where there is a reason for our enemies to be interested in what's there. And if I remember correctly, there's nuclear weapons on the base that the British were unaware of and that were not supposed to be there.
They were in violation of the treaty that they had at that time. There's the other thing that most people weren't aware of. It was also the forward base where the SR-71 flew out of.
So there's a lot of reason for there to be interest from the enemy.
Yeah.
And even maybe not from the enemy. I mean, maybe the British themselves, wanting to kind of get an inside look and find out that they're being lied to and find out what's going on. Do you think, in the research that you've done, are we talking about something that was something that might have been an alien craft? Or are we talking about something that might have been an extraterrestrial craft technology that had been adopted?
See, that's interesting, because from what I've been able to glean from talking to various people about what they know about physics and other people that know about stuff because they were there, I think it was a mixture of stuff. I think it was akin to, the first bike ride. Mom and dad out watching somebody taking the first bike ride, so they have
holding the seat for them while they start going down the road and then letting go.
Yeah.
So do you think that there was, this might have been an earthbound mission, but that might have had extraterrestrial influence?
Yeah, borrowing technology and somebody watching, okay, this is how you do this, small steps. Like I said, they take the training wheels off for the first time and, you fell over on the curb.
The only question that I have about that, though, if it is something that happened or originated from this planet, from this dimension, however you want to look at it, but the only question I have about that is, of all the places that you want to utilize this technology, there's no place that it would set off more of a red flag than on an Air Force base. Because these people are going to know that if they see this, that it's something out of the ordinary, and it's going to draw more attention. And even the fact that they're just watching the skies anyway, it's going to draw attention. If you wanted to take one of these, unless they felt it was the only thing that they could use to gather the information that they wanted to gather, but otherwise it seems like you're taking a big risk taking it out there in front of all these observant eyes.
Well, you also have to know where the area is. I've been out there, and it's rural country land. I mean, it's like very sparsely populated in that area. You've got the ocean to one side, so there's not much out there, and then you've got all of these other bases. So in a sense, if something happens, they're lucky it happened outside of a military base, because they can control that information. That information eventually did leak out, but
with all the people that you've talked to involved in the case, and all the research that you've done with Peter Robbins, working closely with him, and all the research that he's done, and talking to Larry Warren. Between the two of you, you know, you've talked to Larry Warren, you've talked to Colonel Halt, you've talked to Jim Pennison, you've talked to everybody involved in this case. Is there the possibility?
Yeah.
Does the possibility exist that there were people at that Air Force base that knew 100% what was happening, that it was going to happen, and were involved in what happened, and just these witnesses that we have were just never in the know and were never told and never given that information?
I think none of these people were in the know to start with. I think certain people got told limited amount of information after the event happened and were
But were there higher-ups or other people on the base that may have known full well what was going to happen and what happened?
In advance, no, because that's the reason why we have this information out. If people up top knew, then they would have been able to put the screw on the lid a lot tighter. I think this is something that happened, that was unexpected, that they had to contain as best they could after the event.
You know, they always have the reference to it. They always call it Britain's Roswell. And to me, I think that's almost doing this case an injustice, because Roswell was Roswell.
Yeah.
I mean, what happened. Really, essentially, everything that was left over in that case was left in the hands of one person.
Roswell was an accident. Roswell was just a tragedy, and we picked up the pieces.
Right. Whether it was an alien crash, a weather balloon, whatever you want to believe that it was a crash that wasn't supposed to happen. One person ended up with the results of that crash, Jesse Marcel, taking it home and then eventually having it confiscated. So whatever happened in that case, it was over relatively quickly. And it just became a touchstone for this. And it's not only for having a crash and having this incident, but having the cover-up that ensued afterwards. So I think that it's doing the Rendlesham case an injustice to call it that, because it's so much more. And the witnesses that you have are so many more.
Yeah.
And it becomes more of, if you want to look at Roswell as being, it's kind of the story of one man. Whereas this is the story of multiple men and what they have endured over the years, and putting themselves, their careers, their future. Let's not forget, when you're active military, that's one thing. But there's also you're setting yourself up for the future by being active military. You're doing that service as a way to help take care of yourself later on in life, and you're putting all of that at risk to come out and speak to some of these researchers and be featured in books and featured in documentaries. So there was a lot more to lose for these folks to come out.
Oh, yeah, and some of these men have lost it. I'll give you a good example. Larry Warren. Mm-hmm. He lost all kinds of stuff. I mean, his life in terms of paperwork and who he was essentially redacted.
Right. He's had to essentially, expatriate himself.
Yep.
And he has had to, for a while, he was underground.
Yep.
And he even attempted to use a pseudonym, if I remember correctly, originally, not even use his real name to avoid any kind of blowback.
Correct.
But instead it came anyway.
Yeah.
So this is a case that will continue to fascinate us and continue to fascinate ufologists for many years to come. And even as we're very fortunate to have the witnesses that we do in this case, the people who have come forward. And I know that, Stephanie, you're very skeptical a lot of times of some of these stories, but when we talk to some of the, coming from a military family, that when they say something, not only the fact that they're putting their own reputations on the line, but they're putting their own positions on the line as well.
Right, they could lose everything.
And so does that make it stand out a little bit more in your mind that they're probably at least recounting what they've seen, whether or not what they saw was what they saw?
One thing that I come from a Marine Corps family, so that's what I'm used to, but everything is very literal. There's black, there's white, there's no gray at all. So what you see is what you get. What they do say is exact, it's literal, it's to the point. So I do agree with that. I don't know enough about this case to comment either way. I was interested in hearing, obviously, both sides. I don't know if I'm skeptical. I'm just not alien friendly.
Right. I know you kind of you put the blinders on a little bit when we started talking about these topics.
I prefer cats.
But it's one of those cases that as you dig into it and you realize just the wealth of what it was that they experienced, it's not like what we have now, where the more modern cases, even if they happen on military, we have pilots that see things, we have astronauts that see things. But what are they seeing? They're seeing things in passing. They're seeing things in the sky. This was an opportunity for military personnel to get up close and personal with a craft either from this earth or not from this earth, but certainly something that we've never seen before.
On 3 separate nights.
So
it wasn't just one isolated incident. It was recurring with different craft in different locations, all on different nights. And I also met another witness that had a sighting, a daylight sighting, at the base a month later, and was well aware of all of the other earlier sightings. So that area was active for a good amount of time. And there was another sighting outside the base a year before.
Now, just out of curiosity, since I still don't know much, but how do you know if somebody is aware of exactly what happened in the cases and then claim to have a sighting? How do you know it's just not a copycat?
Because he had other people with him.
Okay, but how do you know it's not collectively a copycat sighting? How do you know they didn't just come forward and say, oh, I saw this? How do you differentiate between an actual sighting and somebody that's just looking for to have a conversation?
I think with these witnesses, they all came forth at the same time.
Yeah. The other individual, he's still active in terms of being security and stuff like that, so I don't want to get involved with naming him. But
you don't have to. I didn't even, not specifically who it was. I was just curious because you said the time had passed and they had a daytime sighting. So
correct.
How did you know the difference between?
These are, again, by security officers posted at a gate watching this large cigar-shaped object pass over East Gate, where everybody left, and it is same kind of strange object witnessed by the guards there, and then they, also had heard the other stuff from the other people before, but they kept their story a little bit more quiet, only for the simple fact they saw what was happening to the other people.
Right.
And
they weren't looking for attention.
Yeah, they didn't come out with this. If I remember all the facts right, they didn't come out with this. What happened was Colonel Halt wrote a memo to the higher-ups where he described what happened. And then through Freedom of Information Act, somebody got a hold of that memo, and then they got all the witness names from there, tracked them down. It had been 3 years after the original sighting, so by that point, some of these airmen were no longer active. And so they were able to speak a little bit about it. And then it was Easton. Was it? Let me see. It might be on here. Let me just look real quickly here. It was, yes, British researcher James Easton who really started jumping into this. And then, of course,
Dot Street and Butler and Regina Bruni, and of course Peter
writing the definitive book on the case as well. So this is one of those, I've always felt like this has a little bit more, I don't want to say more legitimacy, but at least it pulls in my interest a little bit more because it wasn't something where people were, at least not to the public, coming out about this sighting. They were certainly talking about it amongst themselves, obviously with Colonel Halt putting out the memo, but it was something that I don't think was ever intended to get out to the public, which I can only assume that had this memo never really been released to the public, we might not ever have known because it is a remote area.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like there was a bunch of people out in the town that were clamoring to find out more about what went on. Like, if we have something here that goes on, here on the south coast of Massachusetts, everybody immediately starts contacting, Otis. They start immediately contacting the New Bedford Airport, the Plymouth Airport. So we have all these different resources that we can go to, so we know when something happens that there's public interest and public outcry to find out what happened. Out there in the middle of nowhere, the cows don't ask that many questions.
Yeah,
They should though.
Well, if they did, then we'd really know what was going on.
Bear in mind, like I said, this is also the period right around now, in Christmas. What's everybody doing in the middle of the night? They're in their homes dealing with family and friends, and
they're not really outside looking at the sky.
Right. And these events happened in the evening, towards the later part of the evening, so chances of anybody being out there to see it to start with are slim. And there was only a handful of the farmers in the area that saw stuff too, although they were spoken to, as they put it, in terms of being witnesses, and they were fairly reluctant to talk about it afterwards.
And John mentioning the fact that the animals were riled up by something. I mean, something happened, and I think we all have to pretty much accept that based on the testimony given and the reports that were given. And Stephanie, I will hook you up with the past episode of our show where we went really in depth and we played the entire 20-minute halt tape, so that you can hear everything that he's describing as he's seeing it. But I think that when you take all that into account, you have to accept the fact that something unusual landed there that night. Something unusual was in the vicinity there, was seen by numerous people. Now, we can debate all day long about what it was, but something happened. And it even goes beyond the point where you can even think of it as a mass hallucination, because it's something even more so than that, because you're dealing with people, first of all, who probably aren't prone to mass hallucination, and or at least would be hyper aware of that possibility, but also just the fact that when you hear Pennison's account and just the tactile nature of what it is. You remember, Moniz, how he described the actual surface of the
feeling like glass, warm glass, and stuff like that.
So sure, something absolutely happened, and I think anybody out there is silly to believe that we're the only intelligent life that's out there. First of all, and second, I think our military is far more advanced.
I'm still concerned that we have intelligent life here.
Yeah, I don't think we're the most intelligent thing on our planet, let alone on others.
People really believe that this is it, and I don't think that that's the case. And I think our military is far advanced, compared to what we actually know goes on. I think a lot of what goes on we're blinded from. But personally, what do you feel this was, Moniz?
I think it's a conglomeration of things. I think that there was, like I said, we were trying to play with technology that is basically constructed elsewhere.
So you use the analogy of the bicycle. I wonder if it's almost more like, we borrowed the keys to Dad's car. And, maybe we shouldn't have been driving it. Well, and having done the soil analysis, what did you find in the soil from at least Larry Warren's experience?
Well, from the soil where Larry said the thing landed, and it's not just him, there's several other witnesses that came forward that all said the same thing, that it was there. So when I was able to check the soil, there was definitely a marked change in the affected area, or the landed area. One of the first things being that the soil, even 10 years later when I tested it, was still almost sterile, microbially sterile. Now that's pretty unusual, and there's a great relationship between the microflora and fauna that lives in soil and when you're using it as a field to grow things in. Okay, there was a definite discoloration difference. There was a high degree of changing from silica to a silicate, which basically is happening under high heat and pressure.
Sure.
Okay, that's when sand is being turned into a type of glass, a vitrification of glass. And what was interesting is there was also a high degree of a compound called FeO, which is ferric oxide. Now, you normally know FeO2, which is basic rust, but FeO is comes from a high reduction atmosphere. It's basically like a meteorite dust, which naturally blankets the planet. Fine, material. Now, what had happened was there was a high degree of this in this glass-like substance, which turned the soil into like little round globules, like semi-glass globules. And the iron FeO inside it was 4 times the normal limit around the rest of the soil that we tested. So the only thing that would cause that would be a high degree of heat and electromagnetism to bring all of that FeO into one area.
Could it have been
a lightning strike? No.
I was going to ask, could it have been petrified lightning?
No.
Could it have been that maybe that was what had landed there? Maybe there had been some sort of meteorite that had landed there.
No.
Because there would have been more. It would have been more widespread.
Right. If you take a look at some of the pictures from Left at Eastgate, you can see that it's an affected area that's roughly about 20 to 25 feet in diameter. And I tested the soil from the top down to about a foot in depth, and it affected, definitely within a foot. And this is years later, and some of it may have been a little thinned out from years of plowing and what have you, but it's it's still roughly there. Since then, it's been covered over and removed, so I've been told.
But you actually still have some of this soil.
I have very little bit of it left, but Peter Robbins still has some. Now, what's interesting about the soil is it became what's known as hydrophobic. In other words, you would take water and you put it on it, and it would roll off, as opposed to control soil, 100 feet out. You put water on it, you got mud.
Mm-hmm.
So this thing that also explains why there would be less microbes and nematodes in it, because without the water you don't have the life, and that's why plants would also grow strangely in it.
Very interesting stuff. And if you want to check out the book, it is called Left at Eastgate. It's by Peter Robbins. Matt Moniz' soil analysis is included in the book, as well as all the testimony of the witnesses. It's probably the go-to volume to learn more about it. But there's also a number of television documentaries that you can watch online as well if you want to find out more. And, of course, we've done numerous episodes on the past here on Spooky Southcoast. I also recommend going way back into the archives. And you might have to go to the SpookySouthcoast.com, because the iTunes archives don't go all the way back. So you might have to go to SpookySouthcoast.com and go to the previous archives that you'll see there in the slideshow, and you'll be able to go back and listen to the episode where we did play the entire Halt tape in its entirety, and we really got in depth on the case with Peter Robbins, and he's somebody who is the go-to source for this information. But what I like about it is that normally when you hear on some of these other radio shows, it's more than one of these witnesses all coming together, and they're all still sharing these stories together. So it's not like you're ever getting just one perspective when you're dealing with this case. So definitely check that out. Check out, I know Jimmy Church on Fade to Black just covered this last week for the anniversary, so you can check out his show as well. He had a number of people, including, I believe he had Peter, and he had John Burroughs on, so definitely worth a listen. While we're on this subject, and in the next hour, we're going to do what we call our Paranormal Year in Review. It's become kind of an annual tradition here on Spooky Southcoast, and we're going to talk about some of the top paranormal stories in 2014, and we're going to take your calls on them as well at 508-996-0500, 877-996-1420. I haven't shown the entire list, to the Spooky crew here, so we're going to get kind of some of their raw reaction to some of these stories, and I remember that. But one of the stories that we talked about this morning here on my morning show was a story that came out today that Greg shared with us during the news, and this kind of goes along the same lines of, what can you believe? And this story suggests that people who believe in a religion, people who have a religious belief, are twice as happy as people that don't. People who believe in that higher power are twice as happy as those who do not believe in a God or believe or participate in an organized religion. And it made me think about UFO experiences. We want to think that there's something more to this life here on Earth, and so we look to God, we look to heaven, we look to the afterlife as a comfort in that regard. But we look to their idea of maybe there's something more than us in the universe, and instead of it being a comforting thing, it's for a lot of people, it's more of a terrifying thing. So I find that really interesting, how there's that dichotomy between, we don't want to be alone, but we want it to be what we want it to be. You know what I mean? Like, we don't want to be the only people in the universe. We want to think that there's something more, but we don't want to think that there's something more as these scaly green guys who are coming down and abducting us.
I think it's the actual physical difference of what you're looking at. I mean, you think, other side, it's humans, it's my loved ones, it's something that looks normal, or so what we think, but then you think about little green men that are going to come and steal you in the middle of the night, and that's a little frightening.
Well, I think that part of
They're not green.
Some of them are.
Gray.
Some of them are. The reptilians are.
The cartoons depict that to small children as these little green men come and steal you in the middle of the night. That's terrifying.
When I heard this report, and I didn't want to get into it too much with the morning audience, because I think that we're a little bit more sophisticated here in Spooky South. I don't want to say sophisticated, but we're a little bit more skeptical, say, about religion. And one of the first thoughts that I had was, well, sure, if you're happier because you believe in a higher power, because, ignorance is bliss. If you can turn over your life to something else and not take personal responsibility for your actions and feel like everything is a divine plan, or that everything will work out in the end as long as you're a good person, then it's easier to live that happier life. It's easier to put all that stuff than to hold that accountability. I don't know how you guys feel about that, if you think that that's... I personally think it's a little cold of me to feel that way, but that's just how I've always felt.
I know a lot of miserable people that go to church weekly. And I've always said that the worst people ever really go to church every single week.
Really?
Yeah. You've never noticed that?
Well, I think
Trying to make up for what they know is.
No, I think it's just like a big facade. Like, oh, look at me. I go to church every week, but they go and they do horrible things to people all week long. So, or maybe they just repent every Sunday. Who knows? But I don't know. I've always just felt if you do something, you know, if you do good deeds and you're a good person, and it is what it is in the end, you know.
Well, we've certainly seen the result of too much religious fervor.
Yes.
And how that can be a negative. I mean, that's had a direct impact on a lot of what we talk about here. You know, a lot of these paranormal topics that we discuss, there are people out there, and we get the phone calls, we get the emails, we get people who say, you know, you really shouldn't be talking about that. That's an affront to God. But what if it's not? What if it's just another way of God showing that he's here, or she?
This could be a very deep conversation and this could take 5 hours.
Well, it certainly could. And
Did you ever hear don't discuss religion or politics?
Right, but this is talk radio. If we don't discuss those two things, what are we going to talk about? You know, we're not a sports station, so yeah.
We're going to get hate calls pretty soon.
Well, see, that's the great thing about the spooky Southcoast time slot, is we can talk about these topics and not get the hate mail.
Right.
You know, because people kind of know. They know where this discussion
Until
might go.
It goes into podcast.
Right. Well, no, even the podcast audience is just as, you know, sarcastic and just as snarky about things as we are. So we love them for that. But the danger is always when you're talking to a more broader audience. You know, chances are people are downloading the podcast, they're probably of a similar mindset to us. But when you're broadcasting out to the general public, that's when you get a lot of that backlash. And I've never once said that religious belief is bad, and I've never once said that religious belief is wrong. I've just said that we have to look at it the same way we would anything else. I don't want to come here and preach to you that ghosts are real and have you accept that 100%. I want to explain to you why I feel that it is. And I always have wanted that same type of response from those who believe in God, and I don't get it. I just get, well, you have to believe because, you know, this.
See, I'm a very inquisitive person. I just like to question everything, and I'll flat out say I believe in God. I was brought up Catholic, and I believe in the other side and everything else. But you know, you have to consider things that you learn, you know, in history or religion, and then, you know, what we're taught and what the actual truth may be. There's a different side to everything. There's one side, second side, and the truth, and you never know what's going to happen. I mean, I think about it all the time. Do I have connection with the other side? Yes, I do. But you have a lot of things that have happened that haven't really happened, if that makes sense, without offending anybody. The Bible was written by man. It wasn't written by God.
And I made this point this morning, but I'll reiterate it here. I've never felt that the Bible is a history book.
Right.
It's more of a philosophy book.
Right. I agree with that.
So it's not about hardcore actual data as much as
philosophy and history context.
Right. It's basically using the history to give a moral lesson.
That it's a history.
Well, the places that they talk about do exist.
Yes, they do. But it's all, if you think about it, based on opinion. And what you take from it is your own opinion.
And the molding of said opinion.
Right. It's, I laugh all the time when people post, you know, different scriptures and things like that.
I hate to hold it there.
Uh-oh.
But we're out of time. See, this is what happens when you bring up, you know, religion with 7 minutes to go in the hour.
We blame you.
It is my fault. We do have to take a break for the news. When we come back on the other side, we can talk more about this and we can get into the top paranormal stories of 2014. So stay tuned for more Spooky Southcoast on the new 1420.
We are New Bedford. The new 1420 WBSM New Bedford.